2025 is already shaping up to be a disastrous year for aviation. But what happened in 2024? Well, it wasn't all calm before the storm. Last year, we saw fatalities reaching into the hundreds, and we're about to take a look into the top 5 disastrous events in the world of aviation in 2024. So strap in as we take a look back at 2024 and the tragic and mostly avoidable aircraft disasters of that year. Let's get into it. Number 5. Transair Senegal Flight HC301. Transair Senegal Flight HC301 will be our first entry, and also the only one on this list that was fortunate enough not to have any fatalities. On the 9th of May, HC301 took off from Dakar Blaise Diagne International Airport in Senegal, or at least they tried to. During takeoff, the passenger plane, carrying 85 people, experienced total hydraulic failure, forcing the 2 pilots to abort takeoff while already semi-airborne. The fact that everyone survived is all down to pure luck. They skittled off the runway and came to rest in relatively soft ground, cushioning and slowing them down exponentially. The left wing exploded, and the passengers and crew were rushed out as fast as possible, fearing that an even bigger explosion could rock the plane. Of the 11 injuries, 4 were quite serious and required long-term hospitalization. However, this wasn't the first time a Boeing 737 of the 1993 range was given some serious problems and close calls in the last few years. So in many ways, the trauma suffered by the passengers wasn't for nothing, because this was the last straw after many inquiries by several governing boards about this particular series of aircraft. A large-scale investigation is currently underway, quietly inspecting every 747 in operation to find out exactly what the cause is of multiple failures on multiple planes just within the last 5 years. Number 4. Flight 9608, Russia. Next up, we got the Russian Sukhoi SSJ 100-95 crash of July the 12th. The Sukhoi was Russia's attempt at getting into the major aviation sphere of large-scale passenger flights, and since its launch, the model has been rife with problems, close calls, and several crashes. Flight 9608 was thankfully not loaded to the brim with passengers, and only had 3 crew members on board during a scheduled domestic ferry flight from Oblast Moscow to Vnukovo. Now, given that this is Russia, you can expect that the details were rather vague on what they were transporting, and no photos or footage have been released of the plane or any of the 3 crew members. But what we did get is a statement on the matter that confirmed that all 3 crew died upon impact when the malfunctioning angle of attack sensors caused them to go nose first into a wooded area. The entire aeroplane fractured into thousands of pieces and burst into flames. So what do you think is being done about the problematic range of aircrafts that's caused so many concerns over the years? Well, we're getting about as much information on that as we did with the details on this crash. One can only hope that it is being investigated as they claim it is. Number 3. Azerbaijan Airlines Flight 8243. And now, things start getting serious. On Christmas Day, Azerbaijan Airlines Flight 8243 left Azerbaijan heading for Grozny International Airport in Russia with 67 bodies on board. The flight was forced to abort landing at their destination the first time due to extreme fog and initiated a go-around to try again. But the second time was not successful either. So the pilots made the decision to turn back and land in the city of Baku in Azerbaijan while they still had enough fuel to do so. But just as they were leaving the Grozny area, several foreign bodies hit the plane. The pilots assumed that they'd flown into a flock of birds and radioed in for an emergency landing in Aktau, Kazakhstan, which was closer, citing a systems failure due to a bird strike. When they called it in for the first time, an explosion could be heard on the cockpit recording. The second and third radio communications were not to ask for approval anymore. They were the pilot's attempt to report all of the systems that were shutting down: hydraulics, GPS, radar, engines. Every single function of the plane was failing one after the other, and that they were landing without waiting for control to give them the go-ahead. Everyone on the ground could see the severity of the situation. The plane was going so fast and weaving through the air so erratically that the pilots had no time to properly align the aircraft for landing, and when they hit the tarmac, they immediately burst into flames from that hard impact. Miraculously, 29 of the passengers survived this destructive explosion. Almost all of them were seated in the tail section. The fact that the pilots managed to give them a chance at survival at all is a miracle in and of itself. But this wasn't a bird strike at all. The terrible truth was that it was a missile strike intended for warfare. The telltale holes that littered the body of the aircraft pointed to a Russian surface-to-air missile hitting Flight 8243. The theory is that Russia, who'd been actively shooting down Ukrainian drones over the past few months, mistook 8243 for a drone and then shot it down. As with the previous entry, Russia has declined to apologize or give an explanation as to why they've repeatedly targeted civilian aircraft throughout their conflict with Ukraine, nor did they give any condolences to the 38 lives lost due to their trigger-happy so-called mistake. Number 2. VOA Pass Flight 2283, Brazil. We recently covered the tragedy of VOA Pass Flight 2283 that crashed in a residential area in Brazil. We'd highly advise that you go ahead and check out that video if you want the full story. But to summarize the events of August 9th, 2283 ran into fatal complications due to severe icing conditions. The flight, loaded with 62 souls and a family's beloved dog, went into a complete flat spin from a height of 17,000 feet straight into a residential area called Vinhedo, right in the heart of Sao Paulo. All 62 people on board were lost to the crash. Despite damage and fires affecting several buildings, no civilians on the ground were killed. 2282 just happened to strike down at a time when the neighborhood was relatively quiet and had minimal people out and about. Had they gone down just an hour before or after, there could have potentially been dozens more innocent lives lost. Number 1. Jeju Air Flight 2216. And finally, we've come to the most tragic loss of life of 2024. And that unfortunate title goes to Flight 2216 of Jeju Air from South Korea. They took off from Bangkok Suvarnabhumi International Airport and arrived at Muan International Airport in South Korea without any incidents. In fact, it was a pretty typical flight for all of the 181 people on board. But as they came down to land, 2216 ran into a flock of birds. The animal's body slammed into the landing gear, which was already deployed, damaging it so severely that it was practically ripped off the plane. The pilots made a split-second decision to attempt a belly land straight onto the runway that they were already aiming for. Not that they had any other option at their disposal anyways. Sadly, their attempt was unsuccessful, despite their sound reasoning and quick reflexes. The plane struck down heavily, overshooting the tarmac by several yards and coming to a stop when it hit a wall in one final colossal explosion. Only the 2 stewardesses seated at the very end of the plane's tail survived the impact, totaling a loss of 179 souls. Although the bird strike, though unfortunate and utterly devastating, was completely unavoidable, there is one more factor to take into account. Muan International Airport is poorly designed, and that wall should not have been placed in the direct path of a runway. Flight 2216 would have most likely still had a monumental amount of casualties, with or without the wall in their way, but there could have been more lives spared had it not been in their direct path. And that brings us to the end of 2024. If you thought 2024 was bad, it's nothing compared to what 2025 has in store for us. It's sad to say already we've had double the amount of fatalities compared to last year, and 3 times as many instances of crashes than the year before. And we're not even halfway through the year yet. Let us know in the comments below if you'd like a mid-year update of the most fatal aviation disasters of 2025 so far, because goodness knows, it can't get any worse than it already has, can it?